The world map is always changing. It is not a fixed and final picture. Instead, it is a story written in ink and borders. This story tells us about our greatest triumphs and our deepest conflicts. Every line on the map represents a moment in time. It might be a battle won, a treaty signed, or a people rising up to claim their freedom. These lines are not permanent. They shift and move like the continents themselves, but on a much faster timescale. The map you see today is just a single frame in a very long movie of human history, a history of constant transformation. Think about the planet Earth, a beautiful blue marble spinning in space. From up here you see no borders, no divisions between nations. You just see one single interconnected world. But when we look closer at the maps we create, we see something different. We see a world divided into a complex patchwork of countries. These divisions are human inventions. They are the result of thousands of years of exploration, conquest, and negotiation. Understanding how these lines were drawn helps us understand who we are. It shows us the journey our species has taken from scattered tribes to a global civilization, a journey filled with incredible creativity and sometimes terrible destruction. The forces that change our maps are powerful. They are the engines of history. War is perhaps the most dramatic force. An army marches, a city falls, and a border is erased and redrawn. Treaties are a quieter force, but just as powerful. Leaders gather in a room, sign a piece of paper, and entire territories can change hands without a single shot fired. Revolutions are another mighty force, a storm from within. People decide they want a new government, a new identity, and they rise up to create a new nation on the map. This process has been happening for millennia and continues to this day. So, let's embark on a journey through time. We will travel back to see the first great empires and watch as they expand their reach across the known world. We will witness the fall of mighty civilizations and the birth of new ones from their ashes. Our journey will take us across vast oceans with brave explorers who filled in the blank spaces on the map and connected continents. We will see how ideas of freedom and self-determination sparked revolutions that created the modern nations we know today. Let's begin our exploration of the epic story of our ever-changing world map. Long ago, there were no countries as we know them. There were city-states, tribes, and small kingdoms. Then, something new appeared, the empire. Empires were vast, powerful states that conquered their neighbors. They were the first great map makers. One of the earliest was the Persian Empire. It stretched from modern-day Turkey all the way to India. Its rulers drew lines on the ground and on their maps, creating provinces and defining the edges of their enormous realm. They built roads and created a system of messengers to connect their vast territory, making their lines on the map a political reality for millions of people. Then came Alexander the Great. He was a young king from Macedonia with a brilliant military mind. In just a few years, he conquered the mighty Persian Empire. His own empire became even larger. It reached from Greece to the frontiers of India. Alexander's conquests dramatically redrew the map of the ancient world. He founded new cities, many named after himself, which became centers of Greek culture. His empire connected east and west in a way no one had before. But his vast creation was not built to last. It was a map held together by one man's ambition. After Alexander's death, his empire shattered. His generals fought each other for control. The huge territory was broken into several smaller kingdoms. The map changed again, violently and quickly. This shows a fundamental rule of map-making. Empires rise and empires fall. While one power weakens, another is waiting to take its place. This cycle of growth and collapse would define the political landscape for centuries to come. The lines drawn by Alexander's successors created new cultural and political divisions that would shape the future of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, a new power was growing in the West, Rome. It started as a small city in Italy, but through relentless warfare and clever politics, it grew and grew. The Roman Empire eventually surrounded the entire Mediterranean Sea, which they called our sea. Their legions marched from Britain to Mesopotamia, and wherever they went, they drew new borders. They built walls, like Hadrian's Wall in Britain, to mark the very edge of their world. The Roman map was one of order and power, a single authority controlling dozens of different cultures under one rule, creating a legacy that would echo for 1,000 years. The mighty Roman Empire could not last forever. It became too big to manage. It faced internal conflicts and constant attacks from tribes along its borders. In the 5th century, the western part of the empire collapsed. This was a monumental event that completely shattered the map of Europe. The single unified territory of Rome broke apart into countless small kingdoms and territories. Groups like the Goths, Vandals, and Franks moved in and carved out their own lands. The neat, orderly Roman map was replaced by a chaotic and constantly shifting patchwork of rival powers. Europe entered a period we call the Dark Ages. Out of this chaos, new kingdoms began to form. One of the most significant was the Frankish Empire, especially under its greatest ruler, Charlemagne. Around the year 800, he managed to unite a large part of Western Europe, including modern-day France, Germany, and Italy. He was even crowned emperor by the Pope in Rome, seen by many as a successor to the old Roman emperors. For a brief time, his empire brought a sense of unity back to the map of Europe. But like Alexander's empire before it, this unity was fragile and depended heavily on its powerful leader. After Charlemagne's death, his empire was divided among his grandsons. This division, confirmed by the Treaty of Verdun in 843, was a pivotal moment in European history. It laid the foundation for the future kingdoms of France and Germany. The map of Europe was changing again. It was moving away from the idea of a single unified empire and toward the idea of separate, distinct kingdoms with their own languages and cultures. This fragmentation would define the political landscape of the Middle Ages, with kings, nobles, and the church all competing for power and land. For the next several hundred years, the map of Europe was a messy affair. It was a web of feudal loyalties. A king might rule a large territory, but powerful dukes and counts controlled their own lands within it. Borders were fluid and often unclear. Wars were constant, but they were usually small-scale conflicts over a castle or a piece of land, not the giant clashes of empires. This complex medieval map, with its overlapping claims and shifting allegiances, slowly began to solidify. Over time, powerful monarchs consolidated their power, paving the way for the nation-states that would eventually dominate the European continent. For thousands of years, the maps of Europeans, Asians, and Africans were largely separate. They showed their own parts of the world in great detail, but the rest was a mystery. The vast Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were giant blank spaces. People imagined sea monsters and strange lands beyond the horizon. But in the 15th century, that all began to change. A new era of exploration was dawning, driven by a desire for trade, wealth, and knowledge. European sailors developed new technologies, like the caravel ship and the magnetic compass, that allowed them to venture farther than ever before. The first major steps were taken by the Portuguese. They cautiously sailed down the coast of Africa, seeking a sea route to the rich spice markets of India. Year after year, they pushed further south. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. This was a huge breakthrough. It proved that a sea route to the east was possible. A decade later, Vasco da Gama completed the journey, reaching India and opening up a direct trade link between Europe and Asia. The Portuguese began to add the detailed coastline of Africa and the shores of the Indian Ocean to their maps. Then came the most famous voyage of all. In 1492, an Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, tried a different idea. He believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. He was wrong about the size of the Earth, and he had no idea two massive continents stood in his way. When he landed in the Bahamas, he thought he was in the East Indies. But his voyage had accidentally discovered the Americas for Europeans. This single event would trigger the most dramatic transformation of the world map in human history. A new world was suddenly added to the known world. The news of Columbus's voyage set off a frenzy of exploration. Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, and Dutch explorers all raced across the Atlantic. They charted the coastlines of North and South America. They sailed up its mighty rivers and trekked across its vast interiors. Ferdinand Magellan's expedition even managed to circumnavigate the globe for the first time, proving definitively that the Earth was round and all its oceans were connected. In just a few decades, the blank spaces on the world map were filled in with astonishing speed. The world was becoming a single global entity for the first time. The age of exploration quickly turned into the age of colonization. Discovering new lands was not enough for the European powers. They wanted to control them. Spain and Portugal were the first to build massive overseas empires. They conquered the powerful Aztec and Inca empires in the Americas. They claimed vast territories and drew lines on the map that had no regard for the people already living there. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 was a stunning example of this. Spain and Portugal literally divided the entire newly discovered world between themselves with a line on a map, a line blessed by the Pope. Other European nations soon joined the race for colonies. England, France, and the Netherlands established settlements in North America. They fought each other for control of islands in the Caribbean, rich with sugar plantations. They set up trading posts in Africa and Asia. The world map was being carved up. Huge areas of the globe were colored in to show they belonged to a distant European king or queen. These colonial empires were different from the land-based empires of the past. They were connected by sea lanes, controlled by powerful navies, and focused on extracting resources to enrich the home country. This process had a devastating impact on people around the world. The lines drawn by colonizers often grouped together rival ethnic groups or split single groups into different colonies. These artificial borders created tensions that would last for centuries and, honestly, continue to cause conflict even today. European languages, religions, and systems of government were imposed on millions of people. The wealth that flowed from the colonies in the form of gold, silver, sugar, and cotton fueled the Industrial Revolution in Europe, making the colonial powers even richer and more powerful, widening the gap between the colonizers and the colonized. By the 19th century, the colonial project reached its peak. At the Scramble for Africa, European leaders met in Berlin in 1884 to create rules for dividing up the African continent. They drew straight lines on a map, cutting across traditional territories and geographic features, with almost no knowledge of the land they were claiming. Within a few decades, almost all of Africa was under European control. The world map now showed a handful of European countries controlling vast global empires. The sun, it was said, never set on the British Empire, because its territories were spread all across the globe. As European empires expanded, powerful new ideas were brewing back home. Ideas about liberty, freedom, and the rights of ordinary people. These ideas were part of a movement called the Enlightenment. They challenged the old way of thinking, the idea that kings had a divine right to rule. These new ideas would become a powerful force for changing the map, not through conquest from the outside, but through revolution from within. People began to believe that they should choose their own government and that nations should be based on a shared culture and identity, not the whims of a monarch. The first great explosion of this revolutionary spirit happened in North America. The 13 British colonies there felt they were being treated unfairly by their distant rulers in London. They were taxed without having any representation in the government. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, they declared their independence in 1776. After a long war, they won their freedom and created a new country, the United States of America. This was a radical moment. It was the first time a major European colony had successfully broken away to form its own independent nation. The birth of the U.S. showed the world that revolution was possible. The American Revolution sent shockwaves across the Atlantic, helping to inspire an even bigger upheaval in France. In 1789, the French people rose up against their king, Louis XVI. They overthrew the monarchy and established a republic based on the principles of liberty, equality, fraternity. The French Revolution was chaotic and violent, and it led to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, a military genius, then marched his armies across Europe, tearing up the old map of kingdoms and empires. He dissolved ancient states, created new ones, and spread revolutionary ideas wherever he went, fundamentally altering the political landscape of the continent. The example of the American and French revolutions, along with the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars, inspired people across Latin America. From Mexico to Argentina, colonists who were born in the Americas began to demand independence from Spain and Portugal. Leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín led armies in long and difficult struggles for liberation. By the 1820s, a whole series of new nations had appeared on the map of South and Central America. The age of kings and empires was beginning to give way to a new age, the age of the nation-state, a powerful idea that would continue to reshape the world. The 20th century was the most violent in human history. It witnessed 2 world wars that completely redrew the map of the planet. World War I, which began in 1914, was a clash of old empires. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires all fought against the British, French, and their allies. When the war ended in 1918, 4 of these great empires lay in ruins. They simply collapsed. Their vast territories were broken up, and the map of Europe and the Middle East was fundamentally remade. This was a political earthquake that created a host of new countries. From the ashes of these fallen empires, new nations were born. In Europe, countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia appeared on the map. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared their independence from Russia. In the Middle East, the former lands of the Ottoman Empire were carved up by the victorious British and French. They drew new borders, creating countries like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. These lines, often drawn without regard for local ethnic and religious groups, planted the seeds for many of the conflicts that still plague the region today. The end of World War I was a messy, complicated redrawing of the world, but the peace did not last. The harsh terms of the treaty that ended the war, combined with a global economic depression, led to the rise of aggressive nationalistic governments in Germany, Italy, and Japan. This set the stage for World War II, an even more destructive conflict that began in 1939. Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, tried to violently redraw the map of Europe once again, conquering its neighbors and creating a vast empire. The war spread across the globe, from the frozen plains of Russia to the tropical islands of the Pacific. It was a total war that cost millions of lives. The end of World War II in 1945 brought another massive transformation of the map. Germany was defeated and divided into 2 separate states, West Germany and East Germany. Japan lost its overseas empire, but the biggest change was the emergence of 2 new global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Europe was split in 2 by an Iron Curtain, with the West aligned with the US and the East controlled by the Soviet Union. This division marked the beginning of the Cold War, a decades-long standoff that would shape global politics and drive map changes for the next 45 years. After World War II, the great European colonial empires began to fall apart. The war had weakened them, and the ideals of freedom and self-determination were spreading across the globe. All over Africa and Asia, people demanded independence. This movement, known as Decolonization, was one of the most significant map-changing processes of the 20th century. First came India and Pakistan, gaining independence from Britain in 1947. This event was a major turning point, inspiring other colonies to fight for their freedom. The process of creating these 2 nations was violent, with the partition leading to massive displacement and conflict. Over the next 2 decades, a wave of independence swept across the globe. One by one, colonies became new countries. In the 1950s and 1960s, dozens of new nations appeared on the map of Africa. Countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Algeria celebrated their newfound freedom. The map of Africa, which had been a patchwork of European colors, was transformed into a continent of independent states. In Southeast Asia, nations like Indonesia and Vietnam also fought for and won their independence. The United Nations grew rapidly as all these new countries joined the international community, each with its own flag and its own seat at the table. This era was also dominated by the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union competed for influence over these new nations. This rivalry often turned local disputes into major international crises. It also led to wars, like the Korean War and the Vietnam War, which left countries divided. The map showed a world split into 3 parts. The First World, meaning the US and its allies. The Second World, which was the Soviet Union and its allies. And the Third World, the newly independent and non-aligned nations. This global standoff kept the map of Europe largely frozen for over 40 years, defined by the heavily guarded Iron Curtain. Then, in a stunningly short period, the Cold War came to an end. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. This was a powerful symbol of the collapse of Soviet control in Eastern Europe. One by one, the communist governments there were overthrown. In 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. It broke apart into 15 independent countries, including Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. This was the largest change to the world map since the end of World War I. Germany was reunified. Countries like Czechoslovakia peacefully split into 2, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, while Yugoslavia broke apart in a series of brutal wars. The post-World War II map was gone forever. The world map today is the result of all this history. It is a mosaic of nearly 200 independent nation-states. But it is by no means final. The forces that have changed the map for thousands of years, war, treaties, and the desire for self-determination, are still at work. Since the year 2000, we have seen new countries born. East Timor gained its independence from Indonesia in 2002 after a long and difficult struggle. In 2011, South Sudan became the world's newest country, breaking away from Sudan after decades of civil war. These events show us that the process of nation-building is not over. At the same time, we see many ongoing disputes over borders and territory. These are the hotspots on our modern map, places where the lines are contested. In some regions, ethnic or religious groups who live within a country want to form their own independent state. These secessionist movements can lead to political tension and sometimes violent conflict. Other disputes are between countries over contested borders, islands, or sea lanes. These conflicts remind us that a line on a map is only as stable as the agreement and power that maintain it. When that agreement breaks down, the map can change. Looking to the future, what changes might we see? Some people wonder if we will see more new countries as different groups demand independence. Others wonder if we might see the opposite. In a world that is becoming more connected through trade, travel, and the internet, perhaps borders will become less important. Organizations like the European Union show how countries can choose to share power and create more open borders for the benefit of all their members. This is a different kind of map change, one based on cooperation rather than conflict, creating larger unions instead of smaller states. The story of our world map is the story of us. It reflects our endless search for identity, security, and prosperity. From the first empires drawing lines in the sand to the complex global map of today, we have been constantly defining and redefining who we are and what spaces we control. The map is a snapshot of our world at this very moment, October 2nd, 2025. But it is a snapshot of a world in motion. The forces of history are still pushing and pulling at these lines. And so, the great epic of our changing world map will continue, written by the choices we make today and the generations who will follow us.